Hi, this is Lesson 3, Quail and Manna for January 6, 2013. The key points of this lesson, first of all, Israelites complained when they had no food. So initially their sin is against God for failure to trust in Him, failure to believe that He would continue to provide for them. But mercifully, graciously, we see God continue to provide for Israel despite their whining and despite their complete lack of thankfulness. A few storytelling items. It had been about a month since Israel was out of Egypt after the Exodus. And you can imagine about 2 million people wandering through the wilderness. And it is a desert like we would think of a desert, so not a lot of supplies and things like that. So Israel's running out of supplies. And rather than a God-pleasing response, well, let's see what God's going to do, how He's going to take care of us, people immediately started to complain and kind of rail against God and go to Moses and complain to him. And they even said, oh, it'd be better if we were still in slavery in Egypt. It would be better if we would have died there, because at least we had food there. Instead of responding angrily to the people, God again shows His grace, and He comes before the people. He assures them of His presence. He lets them know visibly that He is still with them. He comes before them as this glory of the Lord, which is described as kind of fire, light. Obviously, God couldn't show them His real form. God had told Moses before, if you would see me face to face, you would die. Humans can't be in the presence of a holy God. So, excuse me, God had manifested Himself in a way that they could see Him and still be alive. And He promises again through Moses that He would take care of the people and still get them to the promised land. So God begins this plan where He's going to send them quail, these tiny birds, and manna. People have speculated over the years that this was just a natural occurrence, that for some reason these quail would have migrated, changed their migrating pattern to suddenly be in the area of Israel. It defies any human explanation. This is 2 million people being fed on a regular basis by quail. God is causing these quail to come and be food for Israel. He also sends this manna. The word manna itself means, what is it? The people went out and saw this bread lying on the ground and asked, what is it? So that became its name. Not entirely sure what manna is. Some sort of bread. I know the Exodus 16 describes it as this sort of thin wafers that taste like honey. I always thought of it when I was growing up. I thought of it as like Frosted Flakes, something like that. But we're told here that it can be baked, boiled, or eaten raw. So something special about this bread, something never before seen on earth. This is something God made specifically for Israel. Each person gathered about 2 quarts a day. They had specific rules on it as well. They were not to gather enough for a week's long supply. They were supposed to go out each morning and gather it. And that was to teach them, that you trust. Every morning you go out and God will have more food for you. And the people that didn't trust, that tried to gather more than they needed, they would wake up that next morning and find the extra manna that they had gathered was rotten. And that was again another miracle of God. God wanted them to believe every day God will take care of us. On the Sabbath, God had established the Sabbath for them, this day of rest, on which they would not gather manna, so that the day before the Sabbath, which would be Friday, they were allowed to gather extra for that day when they could not go out and gather food. At the end of this lesson, you kind of have, in fact, God is telling the Israelites they need to take a jar of manna and put it in the Ark of the Covenant. Ark of the Covenant isn't built yet, but that's where it will go eventually, because He wants them to teach their children and future generations how He had provided for them in the desert, because it is amazing to think how He took care of them. With us, we're never far from food. We have pantries or refrigerators full of food. If we run out, we go to Meijer or Kroger. We go to restaurants, things like that. But 2 million people wandering through the desert, God took care of them. And He made it as easy as it is for us. You walk outside your tent and there's your food. So God wanted the future generations to know God took care of our ancestors with this miracle, and He will certainly take care of us as well. Some of the teaching items you have, the first one you'll see, I wrote, we have a way of looking fondly at the past without remembering the troubles that we endured. That's kind of one of the elements of our human psyche. Just like the Israelites look back and they're free. They're free from slavery in Egypt. Life in Egypt was terrible. The Pharaoh was forcing them to do this backbreaking work. He was killing their firstborns, or for killing their firstborn sons, and now that they have the slightest bit of trouble, they're looking back on that time and saying, "Oh, those were the golden years." So it's kind of a temptation we have in our sinful nature, is to look back on other situations, kind of gloss over all the bad parts and say, "Oh, I really wish I was living back then. That was a really good time. Now my life is pretty bad." Second item, we are tempted to complain against God when things in our life do not go the way we want. Another temptation that we face as sinners is just complaining. We look around at our lives and say, "This isn't what I want. This isn't a good life." And the first thing we do is we go to God and say, "Well, you're in control of it. You're powerful. You provided manna and quail for the people in Israel. You could make my life easy." And obviously that's sinful. Well, God promises us, "I'll work all things out for your good." So even negative things in our life, even when we don't get what we want, that serves our good. And it's just our limited human perspective that can't always grasp that. And finally, God provides our daily bread for us in different ways today, but it's no less miraculous. Think of the amazing fact that rain comes down and waters the crops, and people keep producing food, that seeds keep growing. So God still takes care of us, and daily bread isn't just the food that we eat, it's the medical care that we have, the fact that we get up every day and we have air to breathe and water to shower with, things like that. So that's just a really strong chance for you to show the kids that they're blessed, and they will continue to be blessed every day of their life, no matter what they look around and see. God is still blessing them with their daily bread. Okay, thank you.